Imagine standing on a vast plain, the earth trembling beneath the hooves of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. On one side, the Persian Empire, the richest, most powerful realm the world had ever seen, led by its great king, Darius III. On the other, a young Macedonian king, just 25 years old, Alexander the Great, with an army less than half the size. Outnumbered, outmatched, but not outsmarted. The stage was set for one of the most legendary battles in history, the Battle of Gaugamela, a clash that would decide the fate of Persia and shape the destiny of the ancient world. The story of Gaugamela begins years before the armies ever met on that fateful plain. At its height, the Persian Empire was the most powerful state the world had ever known. Stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus Valley, it controlled vast lands, immense wealth, and countless peoples. But by the 4th century BC, cracks were beginning to show. Into this world stepped a young king from the rugged land of Macedonia, Alexander. Trained by Aristotle, hardened by campaigns with his father Philip II, and blessed with unmatched charisma, Alexander inherited a dream: to conquer the Persian Empire, the age-old enemy of the Greeks. In 334 BC, he crossed the Hellespont with a relatively small army, beginning his campaign against Persia. In the first major clash at the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, Alexander had already defeated Darius III, but that battle ended without finality. Darius fled the field, his empire still intact. For Alexander, this was unfinished business. After Issus, Alexander turned south. He conquered the rich coastal cities of the Levant, cut off Persia's naval bases, and marched into Egypt. There he was hailed as a liberator and even crowned as pharaoh. Yet his eyes were always fixed eastward. The heart of Persia still remained, and Darius had not given up. Darius, meanwhile, gathered a vast army. Ancient sources claim it numbered close to 1 million, though modern historians estimate closer to 100,000. As the sun rose over Gaugamela, two very different armies prepared for war. On one side stood Darius III with a massive host. Ancient sources boasted of nearly 1 million men, though modern historians estimate closer to 100,000. Still, it dwarfed Alexander's force. Darius commanded troops from across his vast empire: Persians, Bactrians, Scythians, and even Indian war elephants. His most feared weapons were the scythed chariots, designed to rip through enemy ranks. To maximize their effect, he had the battlefield flattened and cleared, creating the perfect stage for cavalry and chariot charges. Facing him, Alexander the Great had a much smaller force, about 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. But his men were not conscripts dragged from distant lands. They were veterans. Hardened by years of campaigning, they had followed Alexander through Anatolia, Syria, and Egypt, trusting his leadership absolutely. At the heart of his army stood the Macedonian phalanx, a wall of long spears bristling outward. Supporting them were Greek hoplites, archers, and light troops. But Alexander's true hammer was the companion cavalry, his elite horsemen, bound to him by loyalty and ready to strike where he led. Numbers favored Persia, weapons favored Persia, but discipline, cohesion, and genius favored Alexander. His men were drilled to perfection, and he never commanded from the rear. He fought at their side. The contrast was clear: a vast but unwieldy Persian host versus a smaller, professional Macedonian army led by one of history's greatest commanders. And as both sides took their positions under the Mesopotamian sun, the fate of empires would soon be decided. The battlefield at Gaugamela stretched wide and flat, exactly as Darius had planned. His goal was simple: overwhelm Alexander with numbers, surround him, and crush him beneath a tide of cavalry and chariots. Darius positioned himself at the center of his massive line, surrounded by elite guards, while his cavalry extended far on both flanks. On the Persian right, thousands of horsemen prepared to sweep around Alexander's army and attack from behind. His scythed chariots stood ready at the front, waiting for the order. The battle opened with a thunder of hooves. Persian chariots hurtled forward, blades spinning, meant to tear through the Macedonian lines. But Alexander had prepared for this. At the last moment, his men stepped aside, creating lanes through their ranks. The chariots charged harmlessly into the gaps, only to be cut down by spearmen and javelins as they passed. The terrifying weapon had been neutralized. Meanwhile, the Persian cavalry surged forward on both wings, trying to stretch and encircle the Macedonians. Alexander responded by advancing his right flank diagonally, pulling Darius's troops away from the center. The battlefield shifted, stretched, and distorted, exactly as Alexander intended. In the middle, the Macedonian phalanx ground forward, holding against waves of Persian infantry. Dust and chaos filled the air, but discipline held the line. Alexander, watching for the perfect moment, tightened his cavalry into a wedge formation. A gap was beginning to open in the Persian line. Darius's attempt to outflank had left his center dangerously exposed. This was the opportunity Alexander had been waiting for. With a cry, he spurred his horse and led the companion cavalry straight into the breach. Lances leveled, the wedge drove toward the heart of the Persian army, straight at Darius himself. As Alexander's companion cavalry thundered across the plain, the Macedonian wedge formation cut like an arrow into the Persian line. Dust rose, shields clashed, and spears shattered as the charge struck home. At the center of the Persian host, panic rippled outward. Darius III, perched high on his royal chariot, watched as Alexander closed in. For the second time in his reign, the great king faced the terrifying sight of the young Macedonian bearing down upon him. The Persians fought desperately to protect their king, but the momentum of the companion cavalry was unstoppable. In the chaos, Alexander came within striking distance of Darius himself. Fearing capture or death, Darius panicked. Abandoning his chariot, he mounted a horse and fled the field. What had begun as a battle between two empires quickly turned into a rout. When soldiers saw their king fleeing, their will to fight dissolved. By day's end, the battlefield was littered with Persian dead. Alexander's casualties were minimal compared to the catastrophic losses of Darius's army. The once mighty Persian host had collapsed, undone not by numbers, but by leadership, discipline, and tactical brilliance. The charge at Gaugamela became one of the most celebrated maneuvers in military history. Alexander had not simply won a battle. He had broken the power of the Persian Empire. From that moment on, he was no longer just a Macedonian king. He was the master of Asia. The Battle of Gaugamela was more than a victory. It was the end of an empire. Darius III fled the field once again, but his authority collapsed. His soldiers deserted him, and within a year he would be betrayed and killed by his own satrap, Bessus. The great king of Persia died not as a ruler, but as a fugitive. For Alexander, the path to empire now lay wide open. In the days after Gaugamela, he entered Babylon, welcomed as a conqueror. Soon after, Susa surrendered, bringing him immense treasures, the wealth of generations of Persian kings. Finally, Alexander marched into Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of Persia. There, its great palace was burned, whether by design or drunken impulse. a fiery symbol of Persia's downfall. Yet Alexander was only 25 years old. Instead of resting on his victories, he pushed further east, driven by an insatiable ambition to conquer the world. The plain of Gaugamela, once an unremarkable Assyrian village, became immortal in history. It was here that Alexander proved his genius and changed the balance of power forever. Persia's centuries-long dominance ended, and a new chapter began.
Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this.